Rabbi Rothschild and the Temple Bombing. Rabbi Rothschild was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 4th, 1911. Of course, he wasn't a rabbi then. Jacob Rothschild was raised Reform by Mayer and Lillian Rothschild. He was part of the Rodolph Shalom congregation. His rabbi would give sermons against worker mistreatment in the Pittsburgh steel industry. He made up his mind to be a rabbi, and he attended rabbinical school in Cincinnati, and he then graduated in 1936. Later he served in the military during World War II. Afterwards he moved to Atlanta and became Hebrew benevolence rabbi. He noticed the terrible conditions for black people living in Atlanta. He decided to use being a rabbi as an outlet for his civil rights activism. His first civil rights sermon was during a Rosh Hashanah service. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. The congregation got used to regular sermons discussing civil rights. Rabbi Rothschild joined many activist groups and reached out to other faiths in the hopes that they would collaborate to work on civil rights. He helped write the Minister's Manifesto, which was a document that reached out to all the races, hoping they would peacefully talk out integration problems. However, Rabbi Rothschild didn't sign it due to it having very Christian language. And then, bang! On October 12, 1950, the temple was bombed with 50 sticks of dynamite. Not a single person was harmed. This bombing was not the first. It was one of 8 successful and attempted bombings committed by the Confederate Underground, a group of racist, anti-Semitic white supremacists. As I learned from southernspaces.com, quote, within 15 minutes of the blast, staff at United Press International received a call from an individual identifying himself as General Gordon of the Confederate Underground. We bombed a temple in Atlanta, intoned the voice. This is the last empty building we will bomb. Negroes and Jews are hereby declared aliens, end quote. 5 people were accused of bombing the temple, all of whom were members of the NSRP, National States Rights Party, which was a group of white racist people. This group said Jewish people had plotted the bombing themselves to make segregation look bad. These 5 people were never convicted for their actions, although they were tried twice. While the temple bombing scared many people, a large amount of community support made people feel safer in expressing their opinion. Rabbi Rothschild was unfazed. He became determined to do more, and he did. He befriended Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize, Rothschild organized the dinner, and when the tragic day came, he gave Martin Luther King Jr.'s eulogy. He continued to be a rabbi until his death in 1973. Once I learned this, I wanted to speak to someone who had been there, and I conducted this interview with some of my close family. What was it like being a young person during the bombing?
I was 13, so I wasn't so terribly young, but I still went to, this is Judy, I still went to religious school at the temple, whose official name was the Hebrew Benevolent Congregation, but it was called the temple, and that's what's actually carved on the front of the building. So in practical terms, I started going to religious school at E. Rivers School. It was shocking, it was sobering. What I chiefly remember about it, first of all, of course, was that it happened very, very early in the morning, so nobody was there, and it was discovered by Robert, whose last name I do not know, who was for many years the caretaker, the janitor at the temple, and he was a black man. And I remember the reaction of the greater Atlanta community and a lot of support for the temple and for our rabbi, Jacob Rothschild, who had been very forthright in promoting civil rights, and that's, we presume, what led to the bombing. But the Atlanta community really backed him and the temple in the rebuilding, in the coming together as a greater community. So that was the more important thing. And the hope was that this terrible act of violence to the, luckily just to the building, and to in support of discrimination, really prompted a very good response. And because this was just 4 years after the Supreme Court's ruling on Brown versus Board of Education. So integration hadn't really happened in Atlanta, even though the law was on the books.
Well, I was 4.5 years older. I remember, the very first thing I remember about the temple bombing was Mother coming into my bedroom and telling me about it. And what I remember, she said, there won't be any Sunday school today. But that really didn't pertain to me because I had already finished going to Sunday school. I don't remember having discussions at school. So what I'm amazed at now is how little it affected me personally.
This will sound odd. I think I remember feeling sort of proud that this happened because it meant that the rabbi had done such a good job and been so supportive of civil rights, and so this was the result. But I remember being proud of him for promoting that point of view.
Tell me what you remember about Rabbi Rothschild.
He was viewed, I think, as very stern. He had a voice that could be impressively commanding. But I went to religious school, and during the later years of religious school, we met on Saturday, and the last part of the morning was attending Saturday morning services. And so every week I heard his sermon, and I liked him a lot.
What do you remember about what it was like being Jewish in Atlanta in the 50s?
Jews in that era were trying very, 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 very much, I think, to fit in, acknowledge you're Jewish, but not making too big a deal of it.
In terms of the attitude and wanting to fit in a certain way, I call your attention, Leo Frank, decades before this, in 1913, was convicted, as it turns out wrongly, but he was convicted of killing a young worker in the a pencil factory in Atlanta. And Leo Frank was Jewish, and he was lynched. His sentence, he was not going to be executed, he was going to be imprisoned, and a mob took him and lynched him. And then many decades later, new evidence came out, and he was exonerated. But
do you remember anything about the involvement of the temple in the civil rights movement before the bomb?
His inviting Martin Luther King Jr. to Atlanta. There was a dinner. Well, when did he win the Nobel Prize, Martin Luther King Jr.? There was a dinner. Okay, well maybe the dinner was not connected with the Nobel Prize, but there was a dinner honoring him.
Did the bombing or Rabbi Rothschild, did either of them change your thinking on civil rights?
Well, sure. That's what I grew up hearing. I don't know that it changed my thinking, but it certainly reinforced my thinking.
This story connects to the theme of this year's History Fair because Rabbi Rothschild took a stand for civil rights. He did it even though he didn't have to. As a white person, he wasn't being affected by Jim Crow laws. Even when terrible people backlashed, he was inspired to do more. We have accomplished a lot in terms of civil rights, but we still have a long way to go. Remembering the terrible ways it used to be and the heroes that helped make it better, can be some of the best motivation to make things even better than they already are.